3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome, Blender friends. Welcome to this total beginners tutorial for those wanting to learn how to model in Blender. What I mean by total beginner is this is for people who've never been in a 3D program at all before. So I will be touching on some of the higher level sort of conceptual stuff, as in what you should probably know while working in 3D if you've never worked in 3D before. So those of you coming from another program, bear with me. I might be moving a little bit slow for you, but I'm just trying to be thorough for those of you who are total beginners. So many of you would know that a lot of commercial software out there gives you the ability to add plugins to them to expand on their capabilities. Well, rather than plugins, Blender has something called add-ons, and add-ons can do the same. If you go buy add-ons for Blender, there's a whole community of developers developing add-ons, people who've started businesses based on these add-ons they've developed, and some of them are incredibly involved and some of them are simple, and many of them are free. There are also a lot of free add-ons that come with Blender, some of which are active when you first launch Blender, and some of those which you have to activate yourself. There is an add-on we'll be using for this tutorial. It's the way we're going to be bringing in our reference image that we'll be working from. I have that little sequence at the beginning where I'm sketching something out. I'm just sketching out the character reference that I'll be using here while I'm taking you through this modeling tutorial. You can create your own sketch, or you can go find one out there on the web. The add-on is called Import Images as Planes. We're going to go into the Edit menu here, then we're going to go down to Preferences. On the left, we're going to click on Add-ons. Then we're going to be using this search functionality because there are a lot of add-ons in here. It's an import add-on, so we're going to start with the word import. And then you'll see that it shows up here. There's a little checkbox we have to check. There's a drop down as well to explain a little bit about what this add-on does. And I invite you to explore some of these other ones too, because they're pretty fun to check out. Alright, let's close that up. So we've got Import Images as Planes active now. That will be active every time you launch Blender. So still on the topic of add-ons, I've got an add-on enabled. It's lets you actually see what I'm doing with my mouse and keyboard, and that's that little thing here on the bottom left that looks like a mouse. That's just so you don't get lost as to what I'm doing. Now when you first launch Blender, you're going to see a splash screen come up. I've got mine disabled. I don't want the splash screen coming up every time. If you want to do that as well, you can go into the preferences and turn it off. The splash screen does serve a purpose. It has your list of most recent files in it, so you can navigate to those directly rather than going up here to the file menu to your recents. Another thing that you're going to see come up by default is this thing in the middle, and that's called the default cube. And that's been a source of many jokes in Blender tutorials. It's typically the first thing that's deleted in a Blender tutorial. We're going to keep that there for now. There are other default things in the scene, and that's our default camera here and our default light. You'll see that when I select things here in the 3D viewport, that they also get selected here in this list. This is called the outliner. This is our primary tool for organizing our scenes in Blender. You'll see there's this thing called the scene collection, and then inside it is a collection. Now you can rename these, add to these, what have you, just like you would organize files on a hard drive. You've got hierarchies and everything. You can do other things with these collections as well, but that is your primary tool for organizing objects in your Blender scenes. And anything that's in your scene will be found somewhere in the outliner. And these here may be self-explanatory to some. The eye little icons will allow you, as you can see, I'm hiding and unhiding the camera or the cube, and that simply hides those objects. Now if I were to render out something in a 3D scene, those things will still appear even if I'm hiding them in the viewport. But if I wanted those to be hidden from the actual render, I would turn off or on these little cameras. So let's get into some basics of modeling and about objects themselves. But before I do that, I just want to preface this whole thing by saying that there are often many ways to do something in 3D. And that isn't more true as it is with modeling. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that one way is right and one way is wrong. There are just different ways of doing things. And at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you to decide which way to go about something. One way may be a little bit more maybe intuitive for you, or you may even enjoy one way of doing something more than another. Or maybe one way is more efficient than another way, and it's all up to you. So don't get hung up on that if you go to another tutorial and maybe somebody is doing something differently. Okay, so the cube here is a primitive, and we can create some pretty rudimentary models by just combining primitives even. Now to add a primitive, I'm going to go and delete the default cube, the irony in it all. So I just hit the delete key on the keyboard after selecting it. I can actually use a keyboard shortcut, Shift A, and that'll bring up this little menu where I've got many object types, but the mesh primitives are in this mesh drop down here, and I'm gonna add that cube back in again. I could have also went up here to the add menu at the top left and chose one of the mesh primitives here, and there are a ton of different objects here, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun exploring those. About primitives, you have to remember two things when working in Blender or any other 3D package. When it comes to objects, you've got the object level of something and the sub-object level of something. In Blender, the object level is called object mode. You'll see that in the top left here. And with the object selected, there's a second level that you can go to called the sub-object level. And in Blender, that's called the edit mode. So there we are with everything selected in edit mode, indicated by the orange. And there are different facets to the sub-object level or the edit mode, and that's the vertex component of an object, or the points, but more accurately and technically called the vertices. And then there are the edges. Now you can see these little icons here, buttons, allow you to navigate between the different facets of the sub-object mode. And here are the faces, or the polygonal faces. So this gives you the power to do a lot of things, because now if we go back to the object mode and I go to one of the tools here on the left, these are again very self-explanatory, and they also have these little explanations that pop up. If I go to the move tool, I'm moving the entire object. If I want that back in the center, of course, Control Z, just like in other applications, is an undo. But if I go into the sub-object level, I don't actually have to go up here to go into that edit mode. I can also tab into edit mode, as they say in Blender, and that's just hitting the tab key, and that gives you edit mode. And here you can select faces individually, edges and points. And you probably guessed that using the move tool here, you can transform these points, which is the powerful part of it, because you can do a lot with this. I'm just gonna undo that. Now, if you want to navigate between the points or vertices, edges, and faces, you can also use number 1 is the vertices. You hit number 2 on the keyboard, you get the edges, and number 3 gives you the faces. Also very intuitive. Now, it's a little different than hitting the numbers on your number pad. The numbers on your number pad are navigation keys. If you hit 1 on your number pad, you get front. 2, you get a user perspective. 3, you get right hand view. If you hit 0, you actually get the view from the camera, our default camera that's in the scene, as you can see there. And now if you just grab the whole thing, you're going to go back into your user perspective. I'm grabbing the whole thing, as you can see in our little illustration here on the left. I'm just using the middle mouse to navigate. And that's going to be the next part of this lesson, is navigation. I'm going to tab out of edit mode while I show you navigation. So I'm going to hit tab again. I'm going to bring us back to the object level. And now zooming in and out, I'm just rolling around that the scroll in the on the mouse. Some of you may not have a scroll wheel on your mouse, and if you don't, you can hold that middle mouse button and your control key on the keyboard. That will actually allow you to zoom in and out as well if you are dragging up and down. If you are just using the middle mouse button, that allows you to orbit like this. So all your navigation is done with that middle mouse button. Now the differences between using a scroll wheel and holding down the control is that the scroll wheel moves in larger increments. So if you want to zoom in and out quicker, you use the scroll wheel, and it's more precise, dragging up and down, holding the control key. It is very handy having that scroll wheel on your mouse, so I would recommend a 3-button mouse that has a scroll wheel in the middle. And that was our orbit. Now if you hold the shift key, that allows you to pan. None of these movements should be confused with moving the camera, because regardless of what I'm doing here in my viewport, just to navigate the scene, that is completely independent of the camera. We're not moving the camera at all while we do this. Because if I go into 0 again to go into the camera view, you can see the camera hasn't moved at all. When I was in the number pad showing you the different viewports here, now that's number 1, the user right hand view is number 3, 7 was the top, and 0 was the camera. I'll go back into the top and show you something. If you hold the control key, you actually get the opposite view that you're in. So if you're in the top and you hold the control key and hit 7, you're going to get the bottom. Just like if you're in the right hand view hitting 3 and hold the control key, you're going to get the left hand view. Just something that might come in handy. So I promise we're going to get to the fun stuff soon. There's just something I forgot to show you. I'm going to delete that default cube again, bring it in by hitting Shift A, cube. Now look to the bottom left, you'll see that there's this little dialog that you can open up by hitting the arrow. And you can do some transforms from here actually as well. They're not that exciting for the cube. If you bring in another primitive, like let's just say we bring in this UV sphere, I'm going to zoom in so you can see what's going on. I can change the number of vertical and horizontal segments by just dragging these. Now if I drag them way down, these shapes sort of change completely, which is pretty cool. You could imagine that you could actually make quite a few things with this. And of course you can change all of this stuff too. And if you want like an exact rotation, you could even type one of these numbers in, like so. Anyway, so that's something to think about there as well. Now I'm going to actually have you bring in your reference image from earlier, and I'm going to be using that add-on, import images as planes. So go File, Import Images as Planes. Let's navigate to your image. Blender recognizes all kinds of different image types. I've saved mine as a JPEG. You can also import image sequences, which come in really handy for doing things like VFX and stuff like that. All these options here on the right, I'm going to leave them at their defaults. Click Import Images as Planes, and you'll see nothing exciting happens yet. We've just got this square here, this plane. But the image is actually on here. We're just in the incorrect display type. We've got these little squares at the top right. The first one is our wireframe view. Then we've got our standard viewport shading that doesn't include the images. And if we go to the next one, we get our basic with our image maps. And then the next one is a rendered view. We're just going to use this 1 second from the end. It renders quicker, and it's what we need right now. You'll see that I drew this model in what's called a T-pose. T-pose is very popular for reference when doing 3D modeling, especially when the model is going to be animated later. If you aren't animating the model, it's not going to be as important that you draw your reference in the T-pose, but I thought that to add that flexibility, I would create her in the T-pose. So the first thing that I want to do is go to the front view, just for the ease of it, by hitting the 1. You'll see that we're looking at the edge, so it's not quite a front view. I want to rotate that. I'm going to use the rotate tool here. Just going to grab it on this axis here. Okay, in the bottom left, I'm going to type in the 90. There you go. Now it's exactly 90 degrees. The reality is that my model was actually drawn the other way around, so the side view was on the right. So actually that's the way I want this one as well. So I'm going to type in -90. It's going to flip that for me. And I also want this to exist so she's sort of standing on this red line. Now, when I scale this, so hit the S, you'll see that it scales from the center. I don't want that. I actually want it to scale from the bottom. It's going to make it a little bit easier later. So here's something that I wanted to show you. It can be a little bit confusing for people at first. There's this little thing here, it's called the 3D cursor. Don't click and drag on it or you'll move it, but it exists here to begin with, although you can move it around. And what I want to do is I want to take the axis of this image and put it where this 3D cursor is. And to do that, I can, with this plane selected, I can go into Object, Set Origin to 3D Cursor. That's going to bring it down here. And that allows us then to scale from the bottom up. So now if I hit S, you'll see it scales from the bottom up. How do we measure this? Because ideally we want to work in real world measurements, and I want her roughly 6 feet tall because she's going to be a heroic sort of character. Not to throw out any heightist stuff, you know, I don't want to discriminate against those that are, you know, more vertically challenged like myself, but I want her roughly 6 feet tall. So how do I get her 6 feet tall in the real world? Well, there are tools for measuring. On the left here, you'll see that there's this little ruler. We're not going to use that yet. What I want to do first is I want to change the scene properties to Imperial. I want to work in feet. So I'm going to go to the right here, and there's this little scene properties button. Click on that. I'm going to go into units and change this to Imperial. And now when I go into this ruler, I'm just going to click on the ruler, and I'm going to start here at the corner, click drag. I can see this whole plane is just a little bit over 3 feet tall. So we're going to want her a little bit taller than that. Something I like to do is actually just bring a cube in, and then over here type in the height of the cube. So I'm going to type in 6 feet, and then from the front view I'm going to just move the cube over like this and up, and now I just basically scale this to match the cube. So hit the S, scale up, and we're right about there. I'm gonna get rid of that cube again, and there you go. She's now exactly 6 feet tall, or well, close enough anyway. Now the next thing I want to do is actually split this up, because I want the front and side view separate. To do that, I'm just going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to right click, select subdivide, and we're going to get this little dialog on the bottom left, and I'm going to subdivide it twice, and conveniently that gives us a line right where we want it. And then I'm going to go into the faces mode, or hit 3, select these faces. By holding the shift key I can select more than one face. I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to separate by selection. And you're going to notice in our outliner here on the right that now we've got another object. I'm going to go into the move tool. Actually, I'm going to go into the object mode first, so tab into object mode, and I want to rotate that so it's facing the other direction. I'm going to turn that like so, and then over here I'm going to type in 90. They both line up now, and I'm actually going to center her this way as well, like this. Just using our standard transforms, just using that move tool. Got her in the middle, just eyeballing it. Actually, I'm going to bring this so it sort of divides her roughly like that. Okay, there we go. So let's quickly rename these pieces first. I'm going to just double click on these names in the outliner. You can change these just like you would in your OS of choice. Blender, by the way, works with PCs, Macs, and on Linux. It's going to be view front. This is going to be view side. I'm actually going to add another control here into our outliner. You do that by going into this little button here. I'm going to click on this little arrow, and that controls the selectability of objects. I'm just going to lock these two so we can't select them by doing that. Now, remember I told you that there are often more than one way to do things in 3D? Well, there's a tool specifically for bringing in reference images in Blender. Yeah, so I took you through this whole thing, and there's a tool specifically made to do this. Well, there are advantages and disadvantages of doing this both ways, but you did learn how to install an add-on. You learned how to subdivide an object, and you learned how to separate an object into different pieces. So there is a method to my madness. We're going to go in the front view. Now, what I didn't mention earlier is if you don't have a number pad on your keyboard, you can actually navigate those views from this little guy here in the top right corner. and I'm going to hit Shift A. And in our add menu, I'm going to go to Image, Reference, and there you go. We have our reference image. No add-ons or anything. So like I said, there are advantages and disadvantages of the two methods, but this is specifically for adding reference images. And you can scale this, so we're going to scale it to the same size as we did with the add-on. Okay, just a little bit smaller. There you go. So this doesn't give us the flexibility that an actual plane would with an image on it. So we can't divide this like we did the plane. But what we can do is divide these two images in an image editor and bring them in separately for front and side views. But you have all the other transforms. You can scale it and rotate it. What would be another reason why we're doing it this way? First, I'm going to hide what we did earlier here. I'm going to bring in our cube again. Shift A, Mesh, Cube. I'm just going to move this up. And I'm going to tab into Edit Mode. And up here at the right, I'm going to go into Wireframe Mode. And this is the advantage right here. When I go into Wireframe Mode, only our object goes into Wireframe Mode and lets us view through it to our reference image. So if you turn on the front view of what we did before, you'll see that that isn't visible. So that is the huge advantage of using the tool made for bringing reference images in. I'm going to go into the edges. I'm going to hold the Shift key down, select these 4 edges. I'm going to go to Subdivide using the front view. I'm going to go into Points by hitting 1, and I'm going to delete the points on the left-hand side, or the vertices. Why are we doing this? We're going to add what's called a modifier. So whatever we do on one side will be copied to the other side automatically. So we're having our work instead of having to do everything twice. So I'm going to ask you to make a mental note of something, and that's the fact that this cube here is now an open object. What I mean by that is the inside of the cube no longer has a face because we've chopped it off. I'll show you what I mean. Now, rather than going up here all the time to go between our different view modes, I'm going to hit Shift Z. I'm in Canada, I say Z. If you're in the US, I know you say Z. That's why I say Z. And if you orbit around, holding that middle mouse button, orbit around and look inside, you'll see that it's open, which is exactly what we want because we're going to be creating the other side using a modifier. Into the world of modifiers, you can do a ton of stuff with modifiers. I'm going to tab out of Edit Mode and jump into this wrench over here. If you're in the UK, you'll call that a spanner, I know. Click on that. We've got a drop down here for Add Modifier, and I'm going to add, you guessed it, the Mirror Modifier right there. And it does exactly what it says. It mirrors things over. You can choose what axes it uses to mirror over. And this little merge is checked off, which is what we're going to use for welding the right and left hand sides. So keep that checked. This number here beside it is a threshold number. That determines the distance points have to be apart before they merge with each other. We're going to leave that as it is right now. I'm going to go back into our wireframe mode. Again, just hit Shift Z to toggle that. And I'm going to add a little bit more geometry so we can get the shape of our character here. I'm going to jump into 2 on the keyboard. Oh, I'm actually still in object mode. So I'm going to hit tab and hit the 2. And there you go. Select the edge. And then with the edge selected, I'm going to show you another shortcut, and that's for creating edge loops. Edge loops will affect all these edges that are vertical if I've got a vertical edge selected, and edge loops will affect the horizontal if I've got one of these horizontal edges selected. I'll demonstrate. I'm going to hit this edge here, or select this edge here. I'm going to go Control R. You'll see that yellow line that represents where we're cutting or adding geometry. If I use that scroll wheel's coming in handy again. I can increase or decrease the number of edge loops I'm adding. And so I'm going to add 3 this time, and I'm going to click to commit to 3 edge loops, and then after that I can slide those and click again to commit where I want those. Now if I go into the front, I'm going to go into the front view by hitting 1. I hit 0 by accident. And I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard, and now I'm actually going to go over to this box select tool. You can use any of these, but I'm going to use box select. I just find it easier because when you click drag, it's going to select not just these points that you can see, but also the points on the back. Now if we were in the shaded view, it wouldn't do that. It only does that in wireframe mode. So that's why, that's another reason for keeping ourselves in wireframe mode when we're doing these, because we want to affect these points in the front and the back. I'll demonstrate here. You drag that over all of these and it's going to select all of these points, the front and the back. So I'm going to deselect by clicking away. I'm going to hit the 1. Click, drag, and I'm going to hit the G. Rather than going over to this arrow tool for the move, I'm going to hit G. You can remember that because G is for grab. Again, very intuitive. Hit G, and that moves us inward. Immediately I can see that our reference isn't quite where we want it to be, so I'm going to tab out of edit mode. The reason I'm tabbing out of edit mode is that you need to tab out of edit mode if you are going to start moving another object around or transforming another object. I'm going to go into our empty, which is our reference, and center it with our geometry a little bit better. Somewhere around here. That's good. And actually, I'm going to change the name of that to front. And I'm going to duplicate it as well. So I'm going to go Control C, Control V, and you can see that's created a duplicate. I'm going to call that duplicate side. And then I'm going to actually go into the into our perspective view here with that selected. Going to go to the rotate tool, rotate here on that blue axis. Put in 90 here in our dialog, so it's perfect. Go into the left-hand view by hitting 3. I'm going to move that so it's roughly right there, like that. Just so when we're ready, we can start moving our points in the side view. Okay. And now I want to just make it so these two don't move, and I'm going to do that, you could probably guess, by clicking on the little arrows here. I'm going to hide that side view for now by hitting the I. I'm going to go back into the front. I'm going to go back into the front by hitting 1 on the number pad. Zoom in a little bit here. Select the cube, which actually I'm going to rename character. And then going to go back into that box select and the edit mode by hitting tab, and let's start selecting these, hitting the G key afterwards and moving them into place. Now you can see these center vertices. I'm trying to keep them together. You can also turn on options to snap to grid if you want. To do that, you can just go in here and you can turn those on. So you turn on vertex and then you can turn on your grid snapping. I'm not going to do that right now. For organic models, it's not all that important to enable all the different snapping options, but at the end of it, just to make sure everything is welded together, you can do that. I'm just going to continue here, moving these points, actually. For the sake of our geometry being what we want it to be, I'm going to leave these angles. You'll understand soon what I'm talking about. We're going to extrude the rest of the legs from the faces here. I'm going to create angles in the other direction here. Middle mouse button, just going to go into our perspective view here, hit 3. Going to extrude some faces out by selecting that face. And now I'm going to hit E for extrude. Again, very intuitive. Hit E again, and then I'm just moving the mouse afterwards. E again, E again, E again, and then go back into the front view. And now I'm just going to follow this contour. Gonna hit the 1. We're still in box select. We're gonna grab that, hit the G again, and just continue. And Control R again. I'm just going to add 1 there as well. No more than 1. I'm going to go back to the front view and move those points around again. The knees obviously bend, so you need geometry there. And I'm going to add the rest for the legs here. We're going to address the side in a minute, so not to worry. The ankle obviously has a point that bends, so we're going to want to make sure there's some loops there. I'm actually going to add a loop here too. So, Control R. I'm going to go back into the faces. Actually going to extrude the front of the foot by hitting the E, like so. And let's go ahead and start working from the side now as well. I'm going to turn off the front view for now, turn the side on, and go to R3 on the number pad, and start moving these points inward.
Welcome to the machine.
Actually, let's give it some heal as well. Gonna grab the face with hitting 3 of the faces. E, bring that out just a little bit. Then go to the left-hand view again.
System shut down.
I'm going to turn off our side view again. Turn on the front view.
Welcome to the machine.
It's getting there. Cool. I'm going to extrude out a little bit more geometry. You can follow along. I'm just going to turn off our reference here for a second, just so we can see a little better. And I'm going to switch back to the shaded mode for a minute. It's going to make this a little bit easier. I'm just looking for some problems here. I can see there's going to be a gap here already, so I'm just going to tab out of edit mode, jump into our modifier, and expand this threshold just a little bit. Put it to 5. You can see it's closed up that gap right away. And then I'm going to go back into edit mode. Actually, there's a hole here. To close that up, I'm going to go into edges, select that, and with those two selected, I can actually fill this hole here by hitting F. Again, very intuitive. Just hit the F key and there you go. Alright, so I'm going to massage this whole thing just a little bit.
System shut down. machine.
Okay, I'm going to do just a little more touch up here. Add some geometry in here. So, by the way, if you want to select an entire ring,
Welcome to the machine.
for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm actually going to kill our modifier here, and we can always, of course, delete half the model and add the mirror back on. But I'm going to actually collapse this modifier so it becomes part of the model. I'm just going to tab out of edit mode,
Shut down.
and then right here we can click on apply, and now this is one complete object. I'm going to go back into edit mode. I'm just going to grab these faces up top here. Extrude out. So you can keep finessing this and adding to this to get your basic shape. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm not going to take it too much further, but I will show you what I'm going to do next. I forgot that I got rid of that mirror modifier. I'm just going to have to grab both sides here at the same time. Let's bring back my tools here by hitting T. I'm just going to scale on this axis here, like so. Tighten these up here. Oh, not what I wanted to do. There we go. So what we can do afterwards here is add another modifier that's going to smooth things out and give us a lot more geometry. We can always return to this unless we apply that modifier like we've applied the mirror modifier. I'm going to go ahead and add a subdivision surface modifier. I'm going to tab out of edit mode, go into our modifiers, subdivision surface. add another level or another 2 levels. So we've got an awesome starting point now to continue with this, refine it further, or use as a base mesh if you wanted to bring this into 3D sculpting, if that's of interest to you. But there may be some issues with this model if you're going to bring it into sculpting, or actually if you are going to do anything with it, and I'll show you what I mean. I mean, apart from just the fact that her neck is super thick right now, and there's some other little details that have to be sort of worked out still. But, oh, by the way, this faceted look here, if you want to get rid of that, just right click and go to Shade Smooth. Actually, adding the smooth shading makes the problems more apparent. You'll see here this little artifact on the surface, and on the back, there's this artifact. That typically would indicate an issue with the geometry, and I know what's happened. When I collapsed the mirror modifier, there's some geometry that was left inside the model. It's a common mistake that beginners make, and I did it on purpose just so I could show you how to fix this afterwards. We're going to go into the wireframe mode again, and I'm going to hide the subdivision modifier by just clicking on this little monitor icon. I'm going to tab into edit mode, and I'm going to go into faces, and right here we've got one face that's inside the model and another one is right here, so we're going to want to delete those there. And now I'm just going to tab back out of edit mode, reapply. I'm not really reapplying, I'm just unhiding the modifier, and I'm going to go back into our shaded view. Now it's a clean foundation to bring into sculpting. Actually, for the heck of it, why don't we take it into sculpting? You can see here the tabs at the top are for our different modes. We've been in layout mode even though we've been modeling. There's no problem modeling in layout mode, but when you're in modeling, it basically brings up the tools that are specific to modeling. Actually, I went and hid my tools again. I'm going to hit T to bring up the tools again. There we go. But if we go into modeling, you'll see how the toolbar on the left changes. They're the same tools that you'll see when we go into edit mode. There they are again. This is a pretty handy mode here too. You can do your edits while you're seeing the modifier take effect as well, which is kind of nice. Hit tab again. I'm going to go ahead and bake this in just like we did with the mirror modifier, and we do that the same way. We'll go over here, apply. I'm going to go into the sculpting tab up top here. I'm going to zoom in. All the navigation is the same as it was before. So the tool that most people want to learn first is the smooth tool that can be found over here, or the smooth brush. Now you'll see that if we start brushing, it's only going to affect one side of the model. Undo that. We also have a mirror here that we can activate up top near this sort of butterfly. I'm going to hit the X. I'm going to reduce the strength of this to 0.15, and it's really nice having a pen tablet when you're doing this, but I'm just going to do it with my mouse. You can't really see it because I've got the strength on very, very, very lightly, but it is smoothing things out right now. I'm going to increase that strength a little bit for when I do the neck. Let me go to 0.25. Reduce the size by using the bracket key. Bracket keys. I'm losing a little bit of the volume in the head here, so I'm going to go to the inflate tool. I'm going to bring up the size of the brush again with the bracket. So those are the brackets that are beside the P on the keyboard. Now to drag out areas, we've got a tool here that's called Grab. I'm going to expand on that. Pull that. Get a bit of a chin going on here.
Welcome to your machine.
We go back to our inflate. Things are looking a little flat back here. Go back to our smooth. Point 2. I'm hitting the enter key after this every time.
System shut down.
So I'm going to smooth that out a little bit like that. Maybe a little bit too far. I'll just leave that for now. Use that grab again. Tuck these heels in a little bit.
Welcome to your machine.
Doesn't matter which side you work on. It will duplicate it just the same. Cool. All right, let's switch back to layout. I'm gonna save this out. So I hope this has helped you beginners out there get a start with modeling. There are a lot of tools I haven't showed you yet, but maybe we'll leave that for future episodes. If you like this, please, a thumbs up. If not, that's okay too. If you haven't subscribed yet, that would be awesome if you did so. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye.